I want everybody to think about this question. Should drug addicts be sent to rehab facilities or prisons? As of right now, 45.4% of inmates in the United States are in prison based on nonviolent drug-related charges. That statistic comes from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. On the sheet that I handed you, you'll see a graph that shows the different reasons that people are imprisoned in the U.S. As you can see, there are more people imprisoned for drug charges than any other kind of charge. The goal of our prison system is to rehabilitate, but ours is failing. In a study conducted in 2005, 76.6% of inmates released were rearrested within 5 years of their release date. That statistic comes from the National Institute of Justice. Statistically speaking, that would mean approximately 58,000 of the 45.4% I previously mentioned will be rearrested within 5 years of their release. In other words, more than half of the current imprisoned drug offenders will return to prison at some point. It appears that sending drug addicts to prison is not an effective way to rehabilitate them. Many people are under the impression that addiction is a choice and not a disease. The first time an addict uses drugs or alcohol is absolutely a choice, but they aren't aware of their addictive behaviors just yet. Also, people tend to think addicts are, quote, weak, immoral, or simply out for a good time at society's expense. That quote came from a Harvard Health blog. Understanding how an addict's brain works will hopefully make people understand that an addiction is a disease. Once society grasps this concept, we can implement rehabilitation programs that don't just involve throwing addicts in prison. An addict's inability to stop using drugs is the result of a damaged prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain involved in executive function. The inability to stop using drugs is also caused by how the brain reacts to stress when it is deprived of the drugs that it has become accustomed to. The usual response to the stress is an overwhelmingly negative emotion, and it can even go as far as depression. When using drugs, the brain is flooded with neurotransmitters, and more specifically, dopamine. Dopamine is often referred to as our feel-good hormone. The brain of an addict becomes accustomed to large amounts of dopamine, so they become insensitive to normal activities that bring you and I happiness. During the process of an addict trying to quit drugs, they are often given an agonist medication. These medications attach themselves to the same transmitters that the abused substance does. This allows the brain to stabilize by controlling cravings so that the planning and reasoning processes can return back to their normal function. These medications are not given in prisons, therefore drug addicts are not going to recover like they would in a rehab facility. In addition to these medications, addicts need to find an alternative source of happiness. Some examples would be social interactions, exercise, and any other healthy activities one might enjoy doing. This is yet another example of why rehab is a more effective a treatment, because oftentimes these activities are only given to inmates on a scheduled basis, so they are not available to them 24/7 like they need to be an effective factor to a positive. Yes. Okay. Addiction is oftentimes caused by genes and life experiences that an addict has no control over. Having a deeper understanding of these uncontrollable factors may also aid in an addict's recovery. With that being said, therapy is a useful tool in rehabilitation, which again is not usually available in prison. This information came from a Harvard Health blog. Rehab, in addition to being more effective for addicts, can also be beneficial to our country. Sending addicts to rehab instead of prison is more likely to cut crime rates and save billions of dollars. Not to mention, it is in the best interest of human welfare. The initial costs of rehab are, in fact, cheaper than incarceration. Addicts who are in recovery are less likely to be rearrested, which ultimately cuts down on law enforcement and court costs. This even goes as far as cutting costs in health care, because the long-term health of a recovered addict will improve and thus decrease the cost of health care for uninsured patients. To get this point across, let me tell you how much rehab would save the criminal justice system. Even if just a mere 10% of drug-addicted offenders were sent to rehab instead of prison, it would save the system $4.8 billion. If we increase this percentage to 40%, it would save the system $12.9 billion. This information came from Foundations Recovery Network. We are all well aware that our country is in trillions of dollars of debt, so why would we not choose a more effective alternative that also happens to be cheaper? In my opinion, sending addicts to rehab is significantly more effective at rehabilitation than sending them to prison. Not only is it in the best interest of human welfare, but it is also in the best interest of our country. It saves us money in the long run by reducing the number of inmates in the United States, decreasing court and law enforcement costs, and drastically reducing the cost of health care for uninsured patients. By rehabilitating instead of incarcerating, crime rates will eventually drop. I hope I have educated you on what addiction is and that sending addicts to rehab is significantly more effective for everyone involved.